Hare Krishna? Can y'all hear me? Good. All right. I grew up in Texas, and I grew up in Houston, and got out of Houston as fast as I could, and discovered Austin, Texas, which is a much more liberal, sort of progressive thinking city. And when I got there, it was, you could rent an apartment for $70 a month, overlooking a beautiful park. And I, when I had this apartment, I never got the key to lock the front door because it was just no problem, a magical time. I went to school there, got a degree in sculpture, but the whole time, kind of growing up, I was always kind of wondering in the back of my head, what's going on? What are we supposed to be doing? Who am I? I'm so different from my parents and so different from the lily white suburb that I grew up in. And so I read books, I looked around. After I graduated from the University of Texas, my sculpture professor and I, who were very close, met an Indian yogi and studied with him for a bit. And because of visa complications, he had to go back to India. But he had invited a senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada named Vishnujana Swami to come and lecture to us in our little yoga class about Bhakti Yoga. But before Vishnujana Swami could come, this yogi was sent back to India. So my professor and I felt like we should go tell Vishnujana Swami that the whole thing's kind of dissipated. And so we did. And that was my introduction to Bhakti. An amazing preacher, wonderful Kirtaniya, very, very sincere Vaishnava. He took this small group of Bhakti yogis in Austin, Texas, out to San Francisco to a Rath Yatra festival. My professor buddy and I couldn't go because we both had jobs. But when that group came back, Vishnujana said to us, Prabhupada's going to New York. He's going to be there for a couple of weeks, and he's going to be doing initiation ceremonies every day, every day, every day. This was 1971, July or August. And every devotee from the East Coast had gone to New York for this initiation ceremonies and just to hear Prabhupada speak. Okay, so we were at the point where, okay, let's do this. And, we both shaved our heads and we went down and bought some cloth and we dyed them the appropriate colors and got on a Greyhound bus and went to New York, got to the third temple in New York. This was the first. There was 61. And then Henry Street, which is a much bigger facility in Brooklyn. So we got to Henry Street, and lo and behold, another devotee who'd been with us in Austin got there before we did and knew that there was this professor coming to see Prabhupada and told Prabhupada's servant, there's this professor from Texas that's coming with one of his students. And Prabhupada said, oh, I would like to see him. So that's how we got to see Prabhupada. And we were, talk about raw. I didn't even know Nama Om Vishnu Prai. We were just like right off the streets practically. But Prabhupada spoke with us, asked us about, what we knew about sculpture, blah, 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 and brought a drawing of the Panchatattva, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita, Gadadhar, Srivas, and asked us if we could make deities, if we can make figures of these personalities that could go into many of our temples all over the world. Oh yes, yeah, we can. I mean, you have to understand, we're coming from this modern art background. I was welding steel, big steel abstract pieces. My professor was carving these big pieces of stone, wood, all, non-figurative. But yes, yeah, we can do this. So after and that was our initial meeting with Prabhupada. We met with him again in Dallas and showed him some very primitive pieces that we'd done. And then we went out to LA and made another grouping of figures, still kind of rough around the edges. And Prabhupada said, well, if you want to make sculpture of deities, you need to go to India. So that began a whole nother chapter in my Hare Krishna career. Got to India in kind of a rickety plane and went to Mayapur, which is the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. And there was a kind of a half-built temple there in the middle of a rice field, and that was our studio. That was where we learned. And actually there's an interesting story that Prabhupada put out word in Mayapur to the sculptors there, come see me, I'm looking for a sculptor to teach my students, right? So this one young man came there to see Prabhupada. He brought with him a little piece of bamboo that was a clay tool and a handful of clay. And as he was speaking with Prabhupada, he showed Prabhupada this portrait that he'd done while they were just conversing back and forth. Prabhupada said, "You're hard." But his name was Milan. Milan couldn't speak any English. So when we got there, it was like this visual training that we had. And the other devotee, major player in this, was a devotee, as you said, Bhardaraj, who also showed up. Prabhupada had told Bhardaraj in New York, you should go to India, you should learn this. It's called Putul. And if you're a master at Putul, you are a Putul Wala. And so that's what we were being trained to be. But Prabhupada expanded that. It wasn't just deities that he wanted. He wanted to follow the order of his spiritual master, who had created these wonderful preaching dioramas of the lives and pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, of Krishna, Vrindavan scenes, as well as philosophical changing bodies. The changing bodies that's out there in the front there is one I did after we did some life-size changing bodies for the museum in LA and in Detroit. So anyway, long story short, went to LA after Mayapur, kind of put out in the ISKCON underground that if you're an artist and if you'd like to help us, come on down to LA. And sure enough, we got these wonderful people that turned out to be super talented. And we had a training program for a while, and then we began. And we showed Prabhupada a model about twice as big as this table of the museum, this Bhagavad Gita museum that we wanted to make. And Prabhupada took his fingers and he walked through that museum, and then was very satisfied. Do it big, and put them everywhere. Put them in all our centers. Well, I don't know if I'm going to live long enough to do that, but maybe next lifetime we'll get a shot at it. So, anyway, so he coached us, cajoled us all the way through, from beginning to end, and he is my guru. He's my teacher. He's my cajoler, I guess you'd say, my enthusiast. And so from LA we went to Detroit, did a whole nother group of exhibits there. And since then, I've done a lot of smaller exhibits that I've been lucky enough to take around to different Rath Yatras and exhibit them there, kind of keeping in the mood of Bhaktisiddhanta, who had, like 50 exhibits that he would take into cities, and there would be wrestlers and sword fighters and exhibits and kirtans and prasadam and lectures, and it was a whole plays, all going, cultural weapons, Prabhupada called it, cultural weapons. And he said that these will help the conditioned souls to learn about their relationship with God. So, anyway, thank you very much for your attention. Let me turn this over. I met this man in the backyard of a little temple we had in Austin, Texas. That's where the Brahmins, he slept in here. I slept in the backyard of this little temple in Austin, Texas. And he came with his wife in a Volkswagen van with a little temple on a
trailer.
Yeah, a trailer in the back. Beautiful, beautiful little temple. That you opened the door and there was Radha and Krishna. We'd have our Mangal artis out in the driveway. But anyway, let me turn you over to him.
No, that's fine. Well, thank you for giving me a nice way to segue into my talk. I'll just elaborate a little bit on that little mobile temple. It was one of the first. It was back in. It had to be 1972, when I had one child at that time. I ended up having 4. But at any rate, I had already done some things which I'll go over in more of a chronological order. But at that time, I was looking for a new service, and I decided to explore a little bit. So I was in a VW van, and I found a 4x8 trailer, and I constructed a little temple, and it was a self-contained unit. We drove to Austin. We also drove all over the South, and would hand out books and then just start a kirtan in any random place, and people would come. It was an interesting several months of just testing the waters for traveling and preaching. It was one of the first of that type, because I don't know if even the buses were running yet.
No,
because it was early. But to get back to what I wanted to explain or share with you all is the experience I had in this space. I was a philosophy major and a religion minor, switching from pre-med. My family are all doctors, so necessarily I had to find my own way. I started in pre-med, but I soon discovered that wasn't my calling. And so I switched to philosophy, and there was a professor in my religion class that I was taking, world religions, and he said, there's a new temple somewhere in Montreal, and for the class I want you to research this temple in Montreal and write your paper on that temple. So I went up to Montreal. I was at the University of Vermont, and so it was about a 3-hour trip, 2.5 hours, up in Montreal from Burlington, and walked up several flights of stairs. This was an old temple too. But it was in its new. It was not as old as 26 Second Avenue. It was started afterward, but it was in its very infancy. It was a repurposed bowling alley. So I was first introduced to Krishna and Krishna consciousness by walking up the flight of stairs into a building, and there was this devotee. Of course, I didn't even know what Hare Krishna meant or what a devotee would look like, but there was this shaven-headed individual with his hand in a bag, and he was muttering something, and I was kind of, wondering, well, is this the right place? Am I in a madhouse, or where am I? So I I went and timidly approached, and he looked up and he said, "Oh, can I help you?" And I said, "I'm looking for a Hindu temple." And he said, "Well, this is the Hare Krishna temple. We're not Hindus." And I said, "Oh, well, maybe this is what I'm looking for. At any rate, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, we chant Hare Krishna, and this is a mantra." And he explained some of the basics, which was, all foreign to me. I didn't have a clue. And he said, and after just some very basic and introductory remarks and little getting to know one another, he said, "Do you want to meet God?" And I said, "Well, if he's here, I came a long way, and it wouldn't be a bad idea." I thought that to myself, but I just timidly said, "Yeah, okay, this sounds good." So he went, and the bowling alley had sheets all over. That's how they made their rooms, is with sheets, cloth and stuff. There wasn't anything fancy about it. So he opened up a sheet, and he fell on the ground. I guess I was raised as a Catholic, so I genuflected, because this is God after all. I have to do something, so I did the sign of the cross and genuflected. And he stood up and he said, "This is Lord Jagannath." And there was this Lord Jagannath, a big Lord Jagannath deity. And I said, "Oh, this is different," because I had no idea what he was talking about. So I further inquired, some things about what I was there for, to do research on this temple. And he said he would like to help me, and he gave me a couple. All they had in those days was Back to Godheads. This was in 1967. They had a few mimeographed. They used to mimeograph them. In fact, when I moved here, they were still mimeographing them in the back of the temple here. We would have correlate them and things like that. It was pretty rudimentary, pretty basic. So anyway, I stayed there for the rest of that semester, and I started my second semester in religious studies in January, and I decided that I wanted to withdraw from the university. So I made a plan to come to New York. I was actually on my way to see Srila Prabhupada, or Swamiji, we called him in those days, on the West Coast. But I was going to stop in New York and get kind of acclimated, because I had very long hair and long beard, and I was, not ready to see my potential guru or spiritual master yet. So I wanted to stay in New York for a while and learn a little bit more about the philosophy. I had never lived in a temple. So I got a letter from Shivananda, that was the devotee in Montreal, and he had contacted or sent a letter ahead as an introduction. I thought, I was pretty formal about it. I didn't want to just pop in, because I was actually withdrawing from school, and I was there with a backpack, all my possessions. And so I wanted to make sure it would stick, at least for a couple of days, so I would be able to bounce back if I had to. But so I went there, and this very, very substantial gentleman met me at the door. His name is Brahmananda. And I say that with all the affection in the world, because although he was a giant of a man in more ways than just physically, he was a very, very strong individual and leader and devotee of Srila Prabhupada. He was very dear to Srila Prabhupada. I come to find out more, of course, as I got to know him and was more involved with the movement. So I came here, and as was the way it was run, found my spot on the floor, so to speak, and started my devotional life, which consisted of being named after a few weeks as the temple commander. And what that means is you take care of the problems that arise. This was a very rough part of town at that time, and before we could open in the morning or anything, we had to get the people that were sleeping on the stoops out of the way, because you couldn't get in the door. So I would try to help them out and do those things. And one time, I guess they were squeamish, but there was a dead rat someplace in the building here, and I had to remove the dead rat. I remember that clearly. I said, why don't you just pick it up and throw it out, you know? But they just, that's why I was the temple commander, 'cause I could take care of the rough stuff. So I went from, I skipped one part that on my notes here I meant to mention. When I was being introduced to Lord Jagannath, he offered me what I came to find out later was a chapati. And of course, in my tradition, prior to that, it was communion. And the communion wafers were this big. And they were very, very, very thin. And I get this thing, and I said, boy, you guys do it right. And so I took that as a really good thing, you know. And then, of course, he loaded me up with some other sweets and things. I said, boy, I really got to learn more about this. So he also had this record, and I encourage you to, it's online everywhere. It's the Happenings record. It's Prabhupada singing in the very early days. It's the first album that was ever produced in our society. And he has a very, very strong introduction into Krishna consciousness with every word full of meaning. And you could just hear that chanting over and over again and listen to that record, and you could make tremendous advancement because it's such a concise way of understanding and hearing and observing Krishna's mercy through the lips and the speech of a pure devotee. And that record is available, at least I don't know if albums are available, because the one I got I wore out. I literally wore it out. And my roommates were ready to hang me at the university because I just played it 24 hours a day. And I took that communion, that chapati, and I put it in front of the record, and I lit a candle, and I would take a chip out of that chapati every day and honor it like that until I went back the next week to the temple. So I was pretty much hooked right from the beginning. And then I had to write my paper, and my paper was on the essential point of Krishna consciousness, I assumed, and I was taught right from the beginning, was the acceptance of a spiritual master, the importance of the seer of the absolute truth to be handed to you. And they explained to me it was like knowledge is like a ripened fruit, and the fruit can't just, if it falls to the ground without being handled properly, then it becomes bruised or damaged in some way. So that knowledge is handed down from spiritual master to spiritual master. So it's very important to seek out a spiritual master. And of course I rebelled at that at first because I thought I was pretty well suited as a philosopher and a religious scholar of 3 months that I could find my own way. And it was so happened that I was there. It was before I moved. I moved here, as I said, in January. So this was sometime in December when I was getting ready to write my paper, and I kind of had a stormy meeting with Shivananda, and I left, and I said, I don't even need signposts to get back to the university. I can find my own way. And I walked out, and I got completely blinded by the storm, and I got veered off track to a cottage that my parents owned in northern Vermont, and I was stranded there for 4 days. And I wrote my paper that you really have to have guidance in life. And that was the gist of the slap that Krishna gave me on the wrist. He showed me. So I took that as a sign. So I wrote the paper, and then I decided I'm going to go to New York. And the rest is pretty much history. I came to New York. I was, as I said, I was the temple commander. A couple interesting things in those days that you might like to hear. We had one incident where an individual came in and offered us a bus, an old rundown bus. And I've told this story a few times. It was a school bus that had all the seats removed, and it was all painted with flowers, and it had no windshield and very little brakes. But I didn't know that at the time. I just knew it was up in Woodstock, New York. And I was given the keys. And as the temple commander, I had to go to retrieve this bus. So I don't know how I got there. I just took trains and buses and whatever, because we didn't have any other means. I didn't have a car or anything. I was getting a bus, so I didn't need a car. So I went up there and I found the bus. I just kind of asked around town, where's this weird looking bus? And it was really bizarre. It was really bizarre. I didn't know what I was doing. I was 19 years old, not even 20 yet. I was 20 in February. Or maybe I was 19 in February, I was 20 the next year. I don't know. It was pretty young. It was pretty early in my, my brain wasn't even developed yet. But, and neither were my skills at driving an old school bus with a broken windshield and no license plates and anything else. So I drove it down from New York down, and I was coming near New York, and I was just following this map, and I ended up in the Holland Tunnel. And I'm going down the Holland Tunnel. Of course, I had no windshield, so it was nice to be in the Holland Tunnel because it was raining, and I could at least see now. Because, and so I ended up in Lower East Side in front of the temple, and I rolled up with the bus. And, everyone was looking at the bus, and it needed a little work. So I tried to straighten it up, because within days, our spiritual master was visiting Boston. So we were going to take this bus. They wanted me to drive the bus to Boston so that all the devotees could see Prabhupada, see Swamiji. So I fixed it up and I put something, a facsimile of a windshield on there, out of plexiglass or something. And I went up to Boston and with several devotees, maybe we had 10 or 15 in there, maybe more, I don't know, because I was driving. I wasn't worrying about anybody that wanted to go could go. And we parked it in front of the temple, and Prabhupada heard that we had a bus. Yes, we have a bus. We have no seats but the driver's seat, but we have a bus. So when that happened, he wanted to go for a ride in the bus. And I said, oh boy, what are we going to do now? We got to get a chair. So we got a chair and we put it next to my seat, and the devotees were holding the chair down so it wouldn't tip over, and Prabhupada walked up and he sat in the chair, and we went over to the place where Srila Prabhupada first landed in in Boston, at the pier. And on the way there, he was talking, and I was driving, and he would point out different things, and he said that knocking down buildings like that's not good. They should repurpose those, make them into ashrams or temples. He said a few things like that stuck with me. I'm a fanatic repurposer to this day. If I find anything, I'll figure out to make something else out of it. I just do that. It's just automatic, and that came from just a few words that Prabhupada said about that. And so as soon as we got back to the temple, he, in his infinite mercy, he thanked me and he said, you should sell this bus. It's not a very good bus. So I went back to New York and cleaned it up a little bit more and rode around the East Village and stuff, and for sale signs on it, and I got a buyer. Didn't even have a license plate. And he asked me for the license, and I said, well, you'll have to make it from this receipt. Just show this to anybody that that you bought it. And it's okay with me, so if it's okay with you, here's a bus, $500. So I got rid of the bus. And all kinds of stuff happened after that when he got pulled over. But that's a different story. That has nothing to do with 22nd Avenue, so I won't get into that. I could go on for days, but I just wanted to keep this basically for my experiences in this space. One other incident, when Srila Prabhupada was here during that year of 1668, from January 68, I was here to the fall. Srila Prabhupada was staying, he had came to visit, and he initiated myself and 5 other devotees in April of 68. One of the devotees, some of you may know him, it was Jayadoita Maharaj. He and I are the only 2 out of the 6. One of them was a college student, and he did that as part of his paper to get initiated, so he didn't last 20 minutes. And there was a few others that flaked off later too. But we're still standing, and of course Jayadoita is really standing high. He's doing great service. So there was an incident where Prabhupada's there was some leak here in the courtyard, and as a result, Prabhupada couldn't use his facilities upstairs. So I immediately searched around and found a shovel and started digging out in the courtyard. And I was going to find out because it was bubbling out of the thing. And as I was doing that, the devotee came over to me and said, "Oh, you can't do that. That's Sudra work. That's beneath us. We can't do that. And Prabhupada was looking out of his window, and they came up and running to Prabhupada. Look at Vamanadev's down there digging in a ditch, you know. And Prabhupada said, leave him alone. He said, he's doing devotional service. So that I learned another thing. It's all right to be on either end of the idiot stick. You can dig for Krishna too. So, and I exposed the leak, and then the landlord came and they got it fixed. So it was I felt completely whatever the word is, vindicated. I was going to say some other V word, but anyway, I was vindicated. So that was a very nice experience I had. And then after that, very shortly after that, New Vrindavan was formed, and so Kirtananda Maharaj and Harigriva and Pradyumna, whom some of you may know, and myself signed on to go up there. I signed on to fix up the old farmhouse. He came into the temple and asked Brahmananda if he could have a carpenter. Do I have anybody in here that knows anything about building? And I'm standing behind him, you know, I want to go to the farm, I want to go to the farm. And so he said, you can take Vamanadeva, you know, but you have to bring him back, you know. But he didn't want to bring me back. So I had to hitchhike to get back, but I came back. I came back after about 2 months, and I had fixed up, done the work on the house, and that was nice. So I was there before New Vrindavan was even named. So I'm a starter. I start things. So then I later started the St. Louis Temple and a couple other things. When Dallas Temple was first made, I helped convert that into a school, put in the showers and stuff like that. So, and then I built the buildings in Gitanagari and New Talavan. I did some work. So I have a few feathers in my cap, but that's all by the mercy of my spiritual master that he's given me the service. But that's about all I had to say about the work here in this temple, other than it looks a lot nicer now than it did when I was here. You know, even before, you know, before we do the renovations, the place was a lot more rundown. You know, it was there was rugs, and it was kind of but the energy in here was phenomenal, and the kirtans were beautiful. And of course, when Srila Prabhupada was here, it was a festival. So thank you very much, and I hope I encourage you to come here more often. This is a very sacred place, and it really gives me a lot of pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to share my remembrances with you. Thank you. Haribol.
Does anyone have a question that you might want to ask? Yeah?
Is this still the same floor?
No, we didn't even know what was underneath the rugs. But I assure you it wasn't this.
So if I went like, wow, Prabhupada walked here, he walked in,
He walked here because his feet never touched the ground. The ceiling was very similar to this, but this has been replicated. But when we get done with it, you'll see the places, and the pictures will be, some of them will be originals too. We have located several original paintings. There's several of them I see here that are original.
You can identify which ones are original.
Yes.
We get asked that a lot.
Yeah, I know, because my wife painted them. She was a student under Jadharani, my wife, Indira. You'll see in that one of Krishna, it has her name written on it. That's an original. And I have another one of Viva Mangala Thakur that I'm going to try to convince her to give. She has it. It was lost in space, and I retrieved it about 3-4 years ago and returned it to her.
So is the idea of this renovation to make it more the way it was?
Yes, we're going back in time. Yeah. Circa 66, 67.
Wow.
Yeah.
To give you a real sense of what it was like to be here. So it's going to be clean, of course, and you know, there won't be dead rats, and you won't have to move bums to get in the door. But beyond that, it'll be very close. Yeah.
One thing I'll say about that is that Vamanadeva Maharaj said devotees travel and they go to temples. They know devotees that they want to see there, or they want to see the deities there. But when anybody comes to 22nd Avenue, we don't have deities, but they want an experience of Prabhupada in the early days. So that's the impetus. And that's what makes this place different than other temples. So when he had that idea, so we should make it the way it was then, to facilitate that for the devotees globally. And when he had that idea, his immediate first idea was to contact Adideva Prabhu, knowing that he would be the one, if anybody could do it, that could do it.
With the help of many others, let me tell you.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But he wanted this place to be a place of pilgrimage.
Yeah.
You know, he said to me recently, he said, preaching centers, we got preaching centers, you know, we have temples, we have so many outreach programs, but this place specifically is a place, it's a holy dham, it's a place of pilgrimage. And we're hoping that devotees from now on, all over the world, will come here just to become inspired and go back to wherever they're from and spread this Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, around that time, just before he reached out to you, we were sort of talking about how to use the space, and there were things like, and Maharaj, it was a bad taste in his mouth when he heard these things. One idea was to make it a restaurant and serve prasadam, which is a noble thing to do,
Sure.
but he said, not here. He said, there are restaurants, but that's not what this space is about. And you said, like, preaching centers right around the block. The Bhakti Center is right there. And they're doing very well as an outreach center. That's not what this space is about. So he was very focused. And of course, when Maharaj gets focused, things happen. He brings on the right people
Things happen.
to make that happen. Maybe one last question, Greg? Or-
Yeah, it was just, it was a week or two ago, in the middle of one of these sessions, someone was talking about how back then, the way that, because it was such a small beginning, there was a lot of devotees living in different apartments in the neighborhood and coming, always rushing to temple for, to do kirtan and stuff like that. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that atmosphere was like.
No,
Yeah.
you're here.
Well, yes. In fact, one of my good friends, Hansaduta and Himavati, lived down the block, and I used to go to their apartment, and they would come here all the time. He was the one. He was a sculptor of sorts. He made Jagannath deities, and there's a little story about that too. But I digress. There were devotees living in apartments around here, and it was very, very a very close knit group, because there were so few of us relative to the thousands that there are now. And so Prabhupada knew us all by name, and he would I would freely, for the first 3 or 4 years of my devotional life, I would write Prabhupada. When I started my temple, I put out a monthly letter, and I always sent the first copy to Srila Prabhupada, and he would write back, "Please keep this up. I want this every month." It was that close of a contact. It was a very, very warm, close feeling. And when someone would have trouble, once I was having trouble, and I was writing him a kind of meandering letter, and he just wrote back about 2 sentences. "I see you are not well. Please come and stay with me for some time, and everything will be fixed up." But by the time I got that letter, I was already over the little hump. But it felt so good to see my spiritual master saying, "Please come, and I'll spend some time with you." That's how close it was.
Yeah, what you're saying reflects a couple of things that Satsvarupa Maharaj wrote in that preamble.
Right.
Namely that Prabhupada was very accessible in those
Yeah.
days, and that it wasn't like a very close-knit family.
It was extremely.
That's great. Vamanadeva Prabhu and Adideva Prabhu ki
Jai.